The past never asks for permission. It simply waits until you believe you've finally escaped it. I had spent my entire life controlling chaos. Men feared my name before they ever saw my face. Deals moved because I nodded once. Wars ended because I refused to blink. Yet none of that prepared me for the moment an ordinary airport terminal brought my entire world to a stop. The private arrival lounge had been cleared hours earlier. My security team moved with quiet precision, blending into the polished marble floors and towering glass walls overlooking the runway. Travelers passed without realizing they were standing only a few steps away from Damien Brooks. That was how I preferred it. Invisible power lasted longer than loud power. Marcus adjusted his tie beside me before checking his watch. "Her flight landed 10 minutes ago," he said. I gave a small nod. Today was supposed to be simple. For the first time in years, I had agreed to let someone into the life I had carefully built behind locked doors and guarded silence. Vanessa had been patient, intelligent, graceful. She understood the boundaries I never explained. I wasn't certain I loved her, but I respected her. Sometimes respect seemed safer than love. Love had a way of making intelligent people careless. I watched passengers emerge through the sliding doors, each reunion unfolding like a quiet film. Children ran into waiting arms. Elderly couples smiled through happy tears. Business travelers hurried toward exits without looking back. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. I wondered what that felt like. "There she is," Marcus whispered. I lifted my eyes. A woman with elegant luggage appeared in the distance, smiling as she searched the crowd. I started forward automatically. Then everything changed. Another figure stepped into view between us. She wasn't looking for anyone. She walked slowly, one hand resting protectively across the gentle curve of her pregnant stomach. Her dark curls framed a face I had once memorized so completely that even years of silence couldn't erase it. Naomi Carter. My feet refused to move. The noise inside the terminal dissolved into a distant echo. Conversations blurred. Announcements faded. Even the rolling suitcases seemed to disappear beneath the pounding of my own heartbeat. It couldn't be her. I had buried that chapter long ago. At least, I had convinced myself that I had. Marcus noticed the change in my expression before speaking carefully. "Boss?" I didn't answer. Naomi looked older than the woman who had disappeared from my life, but not because time had been cruel. She carried herself differently now. Stronger. Calmer. There was a quiet resilience in her eyes that hadn't existed before. She wore no expensive jewelry. No designer labels. Just a simple dress, comfortable shoes, and the unmistakable dignity of someone who had survived storms without asking anyone to rescue her. She still hadn't seen me. My mind betrayed me with memories I had spent years trying to silence. Late-night conversations beneath city lights. Coffee that always grew cold because we talked too long. Her laughter filling spaces I never realized were empty. Then came the phone call. The accusations. The disappearance. Everyone had assured me she had chosen another life. I believed them because believing was easier than chasing someone determined to vanish. Or maybe I had been afraid of discovering the truth. Naomi paused near a large window overlooking the runway, her reflection merging with the afternoon sky. She smiled softly as though speaking to the child she carried. The gesture lasted only seconds, yet it shattered something inside me that years of conflict had never touched. My gaze fell to her stomach. Time began calculating itself without permission. Months. Dates. Memories. Possibilities I didn't dare name. My carefully ordered future suddenly felt fragile enough to disappear with a single answer. Behind me, I heard Vanessa calling my name for the first time. Ahead of me stood the woman I believed I had lost forever. Between them stretched a distance of only a few steps, but it felt wider than every city I had ever conquered. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives with a heartbeat you cannot ignore. Vanessa called my name again, but it sounded impossibly far away. I turned slowly, forcing my face back into the calm expression that had protected me for years. She smiled the moment our eyes met, completely unaware that something inside me had already fallen apart. She walked toward me with effortless elegance, her suitcase rolling quietly across the polished floor. "I thought I'd have to come looking for you," she joked. I managed the smallest smile. "Welcome home." Even my own voice sounded unfamiliar. Marcus watched me carefully, reading every silence the way only someone who had survived beside me for over a decade could. He knew something had happened. He simply didn't know what. Vanessa slipped her hand into mine. Normally I would have noticed the warmth. Today I felt nothing except the weight of another pair of footsteps somewhere behind me. I looked over her shoulder before I could stop myself. Naomi was still there. She had moved toward the baggage claim area, standing patiently among strangers who had no idea they were sharing space with the woman who had just shattered the most disciplined man in the city. She rested both hands over her stomach now. Protective. Instinctive. Natural. The gesture haunted me more than any threat I had ever faced. "Damien?" Vanessa asked softly. "Are you all right?" "Just tired," I answered. It was the oldest lie I knew. Marcus stepped closer. "The cars are ready." I nodded without looking at him. "Take Miss Reynolds to the house." Vanessa frowned. "Aren't you coming?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. That single pause was enough for Marcus to understand my decision before I spoke it aloud. "I have something unexpected to handle." Vanessa studied my face with quiet intelligence. She had always been good at reading people. "Will it take long?" "I don't know." She searched my eyes for another answer, but I had none to give. After a gentle smile, she squeezed my hand and followed Marcus toward the private exit. I watched her disappear without relief or regret. Only confusion remained. The moment they vanished beyond the security doors, I turned back. Naomi was gone. My pulse quickened in a way I hadn't experienced since I was a reckless young man with nothing to lose. "Find her," I said quietly. Marcus didn't ask why. He touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. Within seconds, discreet voices responded through encrypted channels. No panic. No alarms. Just calm efficiency. "Camera feeds are coming online," Marcus reported. We walked toward the airport's private security office instead of chasing blindly through the terminal. I had learned long ago that emotion made people run. Information won every race. Large monitors displayed nearly every corridor inside the airport. Families reunited. Flight crews hurried toward gates. Travelers searched for taxis. Then one screen caught my attention. Naomi stepped outside the main entrance and paused beneath the afternoon sunlight. She wasn't meeting anyone. She wasn't rushing anywhere. She simply stood there for a moment, breathing deeply as if gathering strength before taking another step. A taxi approached the curb. Before entering, she reached into her purse and removed something small. She looked at it with an expression so gentle that it almost hurt to witness. Then she smiled. Not for herself. For the child she carried. She placed the object back inside her bag before disappearing into the waiting car. "Can you track it?" I asked. Marcus remained silent longer than usual. "Of course we can." I nodded once. "Don't let her know." He looked at me carefully. "You still think she left you willingly?" I stared at the empty screen where the taxi had vanished. 5 years ago, I had accepted every explanation people handed me. Naomi had betrayed me. Naomi had chosen someone else. Naomi had disappeared because she wanted a different life. Those stories had kept my pride alive. But pride suddenly felt like the weakest thing I owned. My eyes closed for only a second. Then a memory surfaced with perfect clarity. The last time I saw Naomi before she disappeared, she had tried to say something. I never let her finish. I had walked away first. Standing inside that airport, surrounded by strangers who continued living ordinary lives, I felt one terrifying possibility settle quietly into my heart. What if the greatest mistake of my life had never been losing Naomi? What if it had been refusing to listen before she was gone? A single date can destroy every lie you've spent years believing. I barely slept that night. The city outside my penthouse continued its endless rhythm of lights, traffic, and ambition, but my thoughts never left the airport. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Naomi standing beneath the afternoon sun, one hand resting over the child she carried. I had survived betrayal, negotiations, and impossible decisions. None of them had ever followed me into my dreams the way that simple image did. At sunrise, Marcus entered my office carrying a slim black folder. He placed it on the desk without saying a word. He knew I hated speculation. I preferred facts. She checked into a small apartment on the east side, he said quietly. No bodyguards. No luxury. She's been living there for almost 4 months. I looked up. Employment. Community health clinic. That answer surprised me. Family. Marcus shook his head. None nearby. I opened the folder. Every page contained ordinary details. Utility payments. Grocery receipts. Medical appointments. Taxi rides. The kind of life invisible people lived every day. Naomi had disappeared from my world, but she had never stopped living. Then I reached the medical appointment schedule. My fingers froze against the paper. Estimated due date. I read it once. Then again. Numbers had never lied to me. Dates couldn't be manipulated by emotion. I leaned back slowly, letting silent arithmetic unfold inside my head. The last month we spent together. The night before everything collapsed. The morning she tried to explain something I refused to hear. The calendar aligned with terrifying precision. Marcus remained silent. He already understood what I had discovered. Say it, I whispered. The dates are consistent, he answered carefully. Consistent with what? He met my eyes. The child could be yours. The room became impossibly quiet. I wasn't afraid of the possibility. I was afraid of everything it implied. If the child was mine, then Naomi had carried that truth alone for months. No. Longer than months. Years of silence suddenly felt heavier than any empire I had ever built. I closed the folder and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Naomi was beginning another ordinary morning while carrying a burden that might have belonged to both of us. There's something else, Marcus said. He handed me a small evidence envelope. Inside rested a grainy photograph taken by one of our surveillance teams after Naomi left the clinic the previous afternoon. She stood outside laughing gently with an elderly nurse. In her hand was a tiny pair of baby shoes. White. Simple. Worn only by Hope. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had photographed Naomi smiling. Certainly not while she had been with me. The realization cut deeper than I expected. She's happy, I said quietly. Marcus answered with unusual honesty. She looks peaceful. Peace. That word had never belonged in my vocabulary. My world respected strength. Feared influence. Measured loyalty. But peace? I wasn't sure I had ever possessed it. My phone vibrated across the desk. Vanessa. I watched her name illuminate the screen before silencing the call. She deserved honesty. Instead, I had given her uncertainty. Another consequence I hadn't anticipated. Marcus broke the silence again. Do you want us to make contact? I answered immediately. No, then what? I looked once more at the photograph of Naomi holding those tiny shoes. I want the truth. From who? I remembered our final conversation 5 years earlier. Naomi had cried. She kept repeating that there was something I needed to know. I never listened. Instead, I listened to people who claimed they were protecting me. Advisors. Lawyers. Trusted associates. Every one of them insisted she had betrayed me. At the time, their certainty felt convincing. Today, it felt rehearsed. I slowly stood and buttoned my jacket. Find every person who was involved in Naomi's disappearance. Marcus nodded. Even the ones closest to you. I held his gaze without hesitation. Especially them. For years, I believed my greatest loss was the woman I couldn't forget. But as morning sunlight filled the office, another possibility settled into my heart with unbearable clarity. Maybe I hadn't simply lost the woman I loved. Maybe someone had stolen 5 years from all three of us? The cruelest betrayals are not committed by enemies. They are committed by the people you never thought to question. By noon, every member of my inner circle had received the same message. No explanations. No agenda. Just 3 words. Conference room. Immediately. They arrived one by one, wearing the confidence of people who believed they understood me. Advisors. Attorneys. Financial managers. Men who had stood beside me through years of expansion and conflict. Some had worked with my father before they ever worked for me. Loyalty had always been the foundation of everything I built. Today, I intended to discover whether that foundation had been real or carefully manufactured. The room remained silent as I entered. No one sat until I did. I placed Naomi's file on the polished oak table without opening it. 5 years ago, I began calmly, a woman disappeared from my life. No one answered. They already knew who I meant. I was told she betrayed me. My eyes moved slowly across every face. I believed you. One of my senior legal advisors adjusted his glasses. Damien, this is ancient history. History, I repeated quietly, has a habit of becoming the present. Marcus stood against the wall with his arms folded. He spoke only after I nodded once. We've reopened every communication record from that period. A large monitor illuminated behind me. Emails. Phone logs. Security reports. Financial transfers. Everything had been reconstructed with impossible precision. One name appeared more frequently than any other. Richard Hale. My father's oldest advisor. The man who had practically helped raise me. Richard remained surprisingly composed. What exactly are you accusing me of? I looked directly into his eyes. Nothing. I paused. Not yet. Marcus pressed another key. A recorded phone call echoed through the room. The audio was damaged, but the voices were unmistakable. Naomi. Crying. Begging to speak with me. Richard's voice answered instead. Damien doesn't want to see you anymore. Silence swallowed the room. Then the recording continued. Leave now, Richard said. If you truly love him, disappear before you destroy everything he's built. The recording ended. I never remembered hearing it before. Because I never had. Every call Naomi tried to make had been intercepted before reaching me. Richard lowered his head, exhaling slowly. I was protecting you. My voice remained calm. From what? Love makes powerful men vulnerable. He looked at me with genuine conviction. Your father understood that. My father is dead. The words landed like stone. I make my own decisions. Richard's shoulders sank for the first time. She was pregnant. Every heartbeat inside my chest seemed to stop. The room blurred around me. You knew. I whispered. He closed his eyes. She came here. Another memory I had never lived. Another truth hidden from me. She wanted to tell you herself. And? I convinced her to leave. I stared at him, unable to understand how one conversation could erase 5 years of 2 lives. Why? His answer arrived almost as a confession. Because your enemies had already learned about her. He swallowed heavily. If they knew she was carrying your child, he never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was enough. He believed he had saved us by destroying us. She begged to see you, Richard continued. She said you deserved to know. Every word struck harder than the last. I remember the final day. Naomi's trembling voice. Her desperate attempt to explain. My refusal to listen. I had blamed her for walking away when she had been pushed out by someone I trusted more than my own heart. The conference room felt unbearably small. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended Richard. There was nothing left to defend. I slowly closed the file and stood. Richard looked at me with tears gathering in tired eyes. I never stopped believing I did the right thing. I walked toward the door before stopping beside him. Maybe you did what you believed was right. I looked at him one final time. But you never had the right to choose our future for us. Without another word, I left the room. For 5 years, I had hated the woman I loved. Now I understood the truth. Naomi had never abandoned me. She had been carrying both my child and my silence. Power is measured by what you are willing to lose. Love is measured by what you refuse to replace. I had built my empire on certainty. Every decision was calculated. Every alliance evaluated. Every risk measured before it was taken. Yet nothing had prepared me for the realization that the greatest mistake of my life had not been made in a boardroom or on a battlefield. It had been made inside my own heart. 3 days passed after Richard's confession. 3 days during which I ordered no meetings, signed no contracts, and approved no expansion plans. Instead, I watched. Not through hidden cameras or surveillance reports, but from a respectful distance. Every morning before sunrise, Naomi left her apartment carrying a worn leather tote bag. She stopped at the same neighborhood cafe, always ordering tea instead of coffee now. Pregnancy had changed even the smallest routines I remembered. The elderly cashier greeted her by name. She smiled back with genuine warmth. Then she walked 6 blocks to the community health clinic where she spent her days helping people who would never know how much pain she carried behind those gentle eyes. She laughed with children. She comforted frightened patients. She carried hope into rooms where fear usually arrived first. Watching her, I realized something that unsettled me more than any enemy ever had. Naomi had created a beautiful life without me. I had spent 5 years building a larger empire. She had spent 5 years building a better soul. Late that afternoon, Marcus entered my office without knocking. There's someone here to see you. I looked up. Who? Vanessa. I closed the file in front of me. Send her in. She walked into the office with the same quiet grace that had always defined her. No anger. No dramatic confrontation. Just calm honesty. She sat across from me before speaking. You've been thinking about her? It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes. She smiled sadly, almost as if she had expected nothing else. I wondered how long it would take before you admitted it. Silence settled between us. She looked around the office, at the city skyline beyond the glass, then back at me. When I arrived at the airport, you were already somewhere else. I didn't deny it. I owe you an apology. You owe me the truth. Her words were gentle, not bitter. That somehow made them harder to hear. I leaned forward slowly. There was a woman in my life years ago. Vanessa gave a faint smile. I know. My eyebrows lifted in surprise. Marcus didn't tell me, she added before I could ask. You did. I never mentioned her. Not with words. She looked directly into my eyes. But every time someone asked why you never truly let anyone close, your silence answered for you. I lowered my gaze. For the first time in years, I had nothing intelligent to say. Vanessa stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Do you love her? The answer came before I could think. I never stopped. She nodded once, accepting the truth with remarkable dignity. Then why were you waiting for me at that airport? I closed my eyes briefly. Because I believed the future was something you chose. And now? Now I know the past chooses you first. She laughed softly through glistening eyes. That's probably the most honest thing you've ever said. She reached into her purse and removed the small velvet box I had given her weeks earlier. The engagement ring rested inside, untouched. She placed it gently on my desk. You don't belong to me, Damien. I looked up. You never did. She smiled one last time. Your heart has been waiting for someone else this entire time. Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. When you find her, her voice softened. Don't waste another 5 years proving what should have been obvious from the beginning. The door closed quietly behind her. I stared at the ring lying alone on the desk. It wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the end of an illusion. For years, I believed moving forward meant forgetting the person behind me. But as the evening sun disappeared beneath the skyline, I finally understood the difference between replacing love and finding it again. Forgiveness begins long before the other person is ready to hear "I'm sorry." The next morning, I left my convoy behind. No armored SUVs. No escort vehicles. No men speaking into hidden microphones. For the first time in years, I drove alone. The city looked different through an ordinary windshield. I stopped at red lights instead of watching traffic disappear for me. I heard people laughing on sidewalks. I noticed mothers holding children's hands as they crossed busy streets. It struck me that I had spent years protecting an empire while forgetting how ordinary life actually sounded. Naomi's clinic stood on a quiet corner between a bookstore and a family-owned bakery. The building wasn't impressive. White bricks. Faded blue windows. A small garden filled with flowers planted by volunteers. Nothing about it reflected power. Yet something inside those walls carried more humanity than many of the towers my company owned downtown. I remained inside the car for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I was afraid of Naomi. I was afraid of what I would see in her eyes. Hatred, I could survive. Indifference frightened me far more. Then the clinic door opened. Naomi stepped outside carrying a folder against her chest. She looked tired. Pregnancy had become more visible now. Every careful movement reminded me how much she carried alone. Before I could gather the courage to leave the car, a little girl came running across the sidewalk. She couldn't have been older than 6. She tripped near the curb, dropping a stuffed rabbit into the street just as a delivery van turned the corner. Without hesitation, Naomi hurried forward. She reached the child first, guiding her gently back onto the sidewalk before retrieving the toy herself. The little girl wrapped both arms around Naomi's waist. Naomi laughed softly and knelt despite the discomfort it clearly caused her. You have to watch both directions, she said with patient kindness. The child's mother rushed over, thanking her repeatedly. Naomi simply smiled. She's brave, she replied. Just remind her that brave people still look before they cross. They walked away smiling. Naomi remained standing for a moment, rubbing her lower back before taking a slow breath. My chest tightened. 5 years ago, she would have done exactly the same thing. Some people become kinder after suffering. Others become colder. Naomi had somehow remained herself. I finally stepped out of the car. My shoes touched the pavement with surprising weight. She hadn't seen me yet. Every step toward her felt heavier than walking into any negotiation I had ever faced. When I was only a few feet away, she turned. Our eyes met. Time folded into silence. Her expression didn't fill with anger. It didn't fill with relief either. It simply became still. Damien. She spoke my name quietly, as though testing whether it still belonged in her life. I stopped several feet away, careful not to invade the space she had built without me. "Hi, Naomi." Neither of us moved. Cars passed behind us. Children laughed somewhere down the block. The world continued as though two lives were not quietly colliding again. I noticed instinctively that one of her hands rested over her stomach. Not defensively. Protectively. There was a difference. "I know," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Know what?" "Everything." She looked at me for several long seconds. "No," she answered. "You know what someone finally admitted." Her words landed with calm precision. "The truth and the damage it caused aren't the same thing. I accepted the blow because I deserved it." "You're right." She searched my face, perhaps expecting excuses. I offered none. "Richard told me everything." A faint sadness crossed her expression. 5 years too late. I lowered my eyes. "I came here to apologize." She shook her head almost immediately. "No," I looked up again. "Not here." Her voice remained gentle but firm. "I'm working." She adjusted the strap of her bag before walking past me toward the clinic entrance. Just before disappearing inside, she paused without turning around. "If this conversation matters as much as you think it does," she spoke almost above a whisper. "Come tomorrow." The door closed softly behind her, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't rejection either. For the first time in 5 years, Naomi hadn't walked away from me forever. She had simply asked whether I was finally willing to wait. The hardest conversations are never about what happened. They're about what could have been. I arrived the next morning 10 minutes early. Not because I wanted to impress Naomi. Because for once, I wanted to keep my word without making someone else wait for me. The bakery beside the clinic had just opened. Fresh bread drifted through the cool morning air. Parents hurried children toward school. Nurses entered the clinic carrying paper cups of coffee and unfinished conversations. Life moved with quiet purpose. I stood on the opposite side of the street, feeling strangely out of place in a world that didn't care who I was. There were no bodyguards announcing my arrival. No doors opening before I reached them. Just an ordinary man waiting for a woman whose forgiveness could never be purchased. At exactly 8 o'clock, Naomi stepped outside. She wasn't surprised to see me. She simply nodded toward the small park across the street. "Walk with me." We crossed together without speaking. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. The park was nearly empty except for an elderly man feeding birds near the fountain. We found a quiet bench beneath an old oak tree. Naomi remained standing for a moment before carefully sitting down. Pregnancy made every movement slower now. I waited until she settled before taking the opposite end of the bench, leaving enough space between us to respect the years that had separated us. "You said you know everything," she began softly. "Then tell me what you know." I took a slow breath. "I know Richard stopped your calls." She nodded once. "I know you came looking for me." Another nod. "I know he convinced you to leave because he believed my enemies would use you and my voice faltered. Our child against me." Her eyes lowered to her hands. "That's true." Silence lingered between us. Then she looked at me again. "What else?" I swallowed hard. "I know I failed you." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched a little boy chasing pigeons across the grass. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked. I expected her to say the lies. The separation. The loneliness. Instead, she whispered, "You believed the worst version of me without asking if it was true." The words entered my heart with unbearable precision. She was right. Richard had lied. Others had manipulated me. But the final decision had been mine. I had chosen suspicion over trust. Pride over love. I was angry, I admitted quietly. Naomi gave a faint, tired smile. So was I. She turned toward me for the first time since we sat down. Do you know how many letters I wrote? I looked at her, confused. Letters? 32. She laughed softly without humor. I wrote one almost every week after I left. My chest tightened. I never received them. I know. She reached into her bag and removed a small bundle tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes were worn at the edges, but each one remained sealed. I never mailed them. I stared at the stack in disbelief. Why? Because every time I finished writing, I asked myself the same question. Her fingers brushed the top envelope. If he truly wanted to hear me, wouldn't he have come looking? I closed my eyes. There was no answer that could erase 5 years. I searched eventually, I whispered. Too late. Yes. Neither accusation nor cruelty colored her voice. Only truth. She handed me the letters. Read them when you're alone. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted them. 32 chances to hear the voice I had ignored. 32 conversations that had existed only on paper. I looked down at the first envelope. On the front, in Naomi's familiar handwriting, were only 6 words. For the father who doesn't know. My vision blurred. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not there. Not while she sat beside me. Naomi slowly stood. I have patience waiting. She adjusted her coat before taking a careful step away. I rose instinctively. Naomi, she stopped but didn't turn around. Is the baby? The question refused to leave my throat. She gently rested her hand over her stomach. The baby deserves 2 parents who choose honesty over fear. Then, after a long pause, she looked back at me with eyes filled not with resentment, but quiet hope. The question is whether we're capable of becoming those people before it's too late. She walked toward the clinic, leaving 32 unopened letters in my hands. I realized then that the greatest confession of my life wasn't hidden inside those envelopes. It was the painful truth that every one of them should have been answered years ago. Some letters don't change the past. They simply teach you how much love survived without being heard. I waited until nightfall before opening the first envelope. My penthouse was silent except for the rain tapping softly against the glass walls. The city stretched beneath me like a sea of lights, but for once, I wasn't looking at the skyline. 32 letters rested on my desk. 5 years of conversations that had existed without me. I untied the faded blue ribbon with hands that felt strangely unsteady. The first envelope opened with a quiet tear. Inside was a single page. Dear Damien, you probably hate me today. I don't blame you. If I were standing where you are, I'd probably believe the same lies. But I'm writing this because one day, if truth ever finds you, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when you stopped believing in me. I closed my eyes. My chest tightened so sharply that breathing became difficult. I reached for the second letter. Today I found out I'm pregnant. I spent an hour sitting inside my car trying to decide whether I should be happy or terrified. I wanted our child to grow up hearing your laugh. Instead, I have to learn how to become both parents at once. My fingers trembled. I had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. Yet a single handwritten sentence had reduced me to silence. I continued reading. Week after week. Letter after letter. There were no accusations. No bitterness. Only pieces of a life I should have been living beside her. One letter described the first ultrasound. The doctor asked if the father would be joining us. I smiled and said you were traveling. It was easier than explaining that the man I loved believed I had betrayed him. Another letter described the first kick. Our baby moved today. I laughed and cried at the same time. I placed my hand on my stomach and imagined yours covering mine. Every page carried hope where resentment could have lived. That realization hurt more than any insult ever could. Around midnight, I reached the final envelope. Unlike the others, it had never been sealed. Inside was only a photograph. Naomi stood in front of a nursery window, one hand resting over her stomach. She wasn't smiling. But she wasn't broken either. Written on the back were 8 simple words. I'll stop writing now. I choose to keep living. I stared at those words for a long time. She hadn't waited forever. She had chosen survival. And somehow, I respected her even more because of it. My phone vibrated. Marcus. Talk to me, I answered quietly. There's something you should know. His voice sounded unusually serious. Naomi was admitted to the hospital this evening. Every muscle in my body tightened. What happened? Nothing life-threatening. He paused. The doctor believes the baby may arrive earlier than expected. The letters slipped from my hands onto the desk. Which hospital? Marcus told me the address. Less than 15 minutes later, I was standing outside the maternity wing. Bright white light spilled through the glass entrance. Families waited together in quiet anticipation. Fathers carried flowers. Grandparents smiled nervously. I had never felt more like a stranger. I entered slowly. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I'm here for Naomi Carter. She checked the computer before offering a polite smile. She's stable. Relief washed over me so suddenly that my knees nearly gave way. Can I see her? The receptionist hesitated. I'll ask. A few minutes later, the doctor appeared instead. Mr. Brooks. I nodded. She's resting now. He studied me carefully. She asked for one thing. Hope rose inside me. What? She asked whether you had read the letters. I looked down at my empty hands, remembering the pages still scattered across my desk. Yes, I whispered. The doctor gave a small nod. Then she said you'll finally understand why she never taught your child to hate you. I couldn't speak. Every sacrifice. Every lonely birthday. Every unanswered question. Through all of it, Naomi had protected not only our child, but my place in that child's heart. Standing in the quiet hospital corridor, I realized redemption wasn't earned through power, apologies, or promises. Sometimes, redemption began the moment someone loved you enough to leave the door open, even after you had closed it yourself. A family is not born the moment a child takes its first breath. Sometimes, it is born the moment 2 broken hearts finally choose the same future. Dawn arrived quietly over the city. I had not slept. Naomi's 32 letters remained spread across my desk, each one carrying a version of my life that had existed without me. Before leaving the penthouse, I gathered them carefully and tied the faded blue ribbon exactly as she had. Some things deserved to be returned with the same respect they had been given. When I reached the hospital, the corridors were calmer than they had been the night before. Soft footsteps echoed against polished floors. Nurses exchanged tired smiles at the end of long shifts. Somewhere nearby, a newborn cried for the first time. It sounded less like fear, and more like hope. The doctor met me outside Naomi's room. She's awake, he said quietly. Would you like to come in? I nodded, but my hand remained on the door for several seconds before pushing it open. Naomi looked toward me immediately. Morning sunlight spilled through the window beside her bed, painting warm light across her face. She looked exhausted. Yet somehow, she had never looked stronger. I walked inside slowly and placed the bundle of letters on the small table beside her. I read every one. Her eyes rested on the ribbon for a long moment. Then you know everything I never had the courage to say out loud. I shook my head gently. No, my voice was barely above a whisper. I know everything you found the courage to say, even when you believed I'd never hear it. Tears gathered quietly in her eyes. Neither of us rushed to hide them. I pulled a chair beside her bed. There was no desk separating us. No conference table. No bodyguards waiting outside. Just two people who had spent 5 years carrying the same grief from opposite directions. I can't give you those years back, I said. I know. I can't erase every birthday I missed. She looked down at her hands. No, and I can't forgive myself for believing strangers before believing the woman I loved. Silence filled the room. Finally, Naomi reached across the small space between us. Her fingers rested lightly over mine. Then don't spend the rest of your life trying to repay a debt that can never be paid. I looked into her eyes. What should I do? She gave the smallest smile. Be here. Such simple words. Yet they carried more weight than every promise I had ever made. At that moment, the doctor returned carrying a small monitor. Would either of you like to hear the baby's heartbeat? Naomi looked at me. Not the mafia boss. Not the man who had failed her. Just Damien. I nodded carefully. The doctor placed the monitor against her stomach. For a brief second, there was only static. Then it came. Fast. Strong. Steady. A tiny heartbeat filled the quiet hospital room. Mine stopped. Naomi's eyes closed as tears escaped down her cheeks. Mine followed only a second later. I had heard applause from thousands of people. I had heard engines, helicopters, celebrations, and victories. None of them had ever sounded like this. The doctor smiled before quietly leaving us alone. We remained silent, listening until the rhythm faded from the room. Our baby, I whispered, almost afraid the words might disappear if spoken too loudly. Naomi nodded. Our baby. I carefully turned my hand over beneath hers, our fingers finally intertwining again after 5 years apart. There was no dramatic declaration. No impossible miracle. Only a quiet decision. The kind that changes everything. Weeks later, when our child finally entered the world, I wasn't standing in an office giving orders. I wasn't negotiating power or protecting an empire. I was beside Naomi, holding her hand exactly as she had once imagined in one of those forgotten letters. In that moment, I understood something I had spent half my life chasing. Power could build cities. Money could buy almost anything. Fear could command obedience. But none of them could create what love patiently rebuilt after truth finally arrived. Looking down at our child sleeping peacefully between us, I realized the greatest inheritance I would ever leave wasn't my empire. It was the promise that this little heart would never have to wonder whether it was chosen. Because some families are created by blood. Ours was created by forgiveness. And sometimes, the most powerful man in the room is simply the one humble enough to say, I'm finally home.